I'm Janet Mock, and this is how it got better. I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1983. Our family then moved to Oakland. I was existing as a young child of color in communities that were ravaged by poverty. I lived in Oakland, California at the height of the crack epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. And on top of all of that, I was also struggling with my own identity issues as a trans girl. I think probably the first time when I kind of realized that my difference was a point of discussion or debate would be when I put on a dress for the first time when I was 6 years old. And my grandmother caught me and she smacked me on my butt. It was super traumatizing, like to have your grandmother correct you in that way, to have someone that you love correct you, to say that what you felt was natural and who you felt you are is not right. And so therefore I am not right. My grandmother still didn't want that for me, just like my father didn't really want that for me. In school, that was like the next space in which I learned that certain ways in which I would say things. Like I remember when I was in the second grade and we were asked what we wanted to be when we grew up. And at the time, I said secretary. And I remember I went home with a note addressing the ways in which my gender expression, the ways in which I liked girls' things or hung around with girls was something that should be signaled, and that was a problem or an issue. And I remember that began kind of the discussions and monologues from my father about how I should properly act. And so in front of him, I would try to perform masculinity in a way that made him more comfortable, in a way that made me not as visible and didn't put a target on my back in our own household. He wanted to raise a strong son who he gave his name to and all of this stuff. But your children don't belong to you. They're their own people. I learned quite quickly how to compromise the way in which I present in the world. I knew that because my gender nonconformity was seen as wrong, that then I should hide it. And I learned to hide myself. I went back to live with my mom in 1995, and it was a new world in a sense. Like I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Hawaii. There would be no me. There's a space within the Hawaiian culture, which my mom is from, which I grew up in. There was a space for a third gender beyond male and female, a cultural space called mahu. And the mahu within Hawaiian culture was someone that kind of embodied all genders, was kind of a champion of gender nonconformity, of the arts, of kind of being revered within the culture. And so it was nice to grow up in this space where at the bottom minimum level, at least gender nonconformity and gender diversity was at least tolerated, if not accepted. And then in 7th grade, it was a game changer. I met my best friend, Wendy, who happened to be a trans girl. And she walked past me on the playground one day and when I was picking up my brother from school, and she just said, "I know you." She clocked my T, as we say in the trans community. And she was just like, "You need to basically stop pretending and just be my friend." And that changed my entire life. She was the first person to see me as a girl, the first person I told that I was a girl. It was my first free and safe space to express who I was as a young trans girl. And it was powerful to have a best friend who was going through the same journey that I was. I understood at a very young age that though I may not have many resources or assets, right, financially, the one thing that I did have was my identity. And so when I was 12 years old and I finally gained some agency to pick out my clothes, to choose the friends that I want, to exist kind of in my gender identity, I fought hard for that because I knew that that was the first step for me to getting anything else that I wanted in the world. And so a lot of the struggles for me came with resources, right? Like trying to find affordable and sensitive healthcare as a trans girl, trying to get access to gender-affirming procedures that I needed as a young person. Piggybacking off of my friend Wendy's access to hormones. A lot of the ways in which I dealt with it and a lot of my girlfriends dealt with it was underground economies. Some dealt drugs or dealt with that piece of it. Some, like myself, dealt within the sex trade, and that was something in which that I went to as a young person because of whole systems that were pushing me there. New York was always this dream for me. I feel like everything that I watched on TV was based in New York, from Total Request Live to Sex and the City. Everything was like, you need to go to New York to like be your true self. And I remember coming to downtown Manhattan and just really feeling myself, like everything was like in alignment. And so then I went to NYU and I applied to school there for journalism. I don't think I really got politicized or radicalized until I was in college. I had access to feminist texts. I was able to learn about, the gay and lesbian liberation. Got to learn about the roots of Stonewall and how trans women and queer youth and drag queens were on the front lines that night at Stonewall. Thinking about Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Miss Major Griffin Gracie, these trans women of color who were like radical revolutionaries. I hope that these women's names are spoken just as much as we speak about Harvey Milk, right? Just as much as we speak about Vito Russo, just as much as we speak about any other kind of pioneer within the LGBT movement, that we really say that these women were also there fighting for their lives. What's so interesting about being at Marie Claire's, it was the magazine in which I first told my story in 2011. Kind of surreal to now be an editor here. My first big feature for Marie Claire, it opens talking about RuPaul's presence as Mac's first spokesperson, right? Like this, I remember being in the 7th grade, seeing like this huge poster, and it felt like it was life-size. A big, blonde, tall, vibrant smiled drag queen in red latex saying that I'm the new Mac girl, It was celebrating difference in a way that made me, as like this 12-year-old, feel as if RuPaul could be seen, then I could be seen.
I'm never going to do a fashion line. I think that should stay right there with real designers. I'm not a big believer in that.
I think what I would tell a young person that's struggling with difference or with their identity is to not listen to anyone but yourself. To be unapologetic in your own voice, in your own experiences of what's authentic and real to you, to surround yourself with people who validate and affirm your identity and your truth, and to, as much as possible, silence those like negative voices that try to negate who you know yourself to be. I loved books so much, but I never had access to a book that really reflected all of who I was. And I think that that's what really pushed me to write Redefining Realness and give like the 7th grade girl that I was in the library looking for books, to give her a book and say that you have this now. You have a blueprint to show what your life can look like, what's possible for you. I think that's what makes stories so powerful, is that when we have access to them, we feel less alone. We feel as if we can go out and conquer the world because someone had already been there. And so for me, I was very much influenced, I think largely by Felicity. She went to fictional UNY, and so then I went to NYU and I applied to grad school there for journalism. And I got in and packed my bags and went on student loan money. and I'm still in debt because of that. So it doesn't get that better yet. But yeah, student loan struggle is real.